Hey, welcome to Breakwood Carpentry. In this video, I'll be replacing all of the old door trim and window trim, and I'll be replacing it with the new Craftsman style trim. So for the doors, they're relatively easy to remove the old trim. You just cut the caulk lines and then pry up the trim. If there's any nails left behind, you just pry those out with a hammer or a pry bar. Now for the window, I'm going to be doing this as one whole unit. The jambs as well as the trim will all slide in as one whole unit. So in the corner of the drywall, they put metal corner beads. They come out about 1.5 inches. So I'm going to be cutting a line down the wall here so that I can score that out. So that way when I pull that off, it doesn't rip the paint going any further this way. I'm going to be putting trim 1x4 here. So I have some space to mess up a little bit, but I want to make sure that I don't go outside of that space where my trim is going to be. I want to keep this part of the wall intact. Throughout this video, I use the word stool and sill interchangeably to talk about the windowsill, but I actually mean stool, so don't get all upset about it. It's not that big of a deal. So to remove the windowsill, you just want to make sure that you score any caulk lines around it, and then I'm just going to be shoving my pry bar underneath of it and just prying it up. So this is the window with all of the corner beads and the sill removed. The last step is to just remove the drywall right here. And keep in mind, if you're doing this in a finished room, it does create quite a mess. So either lay plastic or put a tarp down or something, but just be prepared for a lot of dust and debris. Now, when I was removing my drywall, it was installed with nails. Typical drywall is installed with screws, but this is an older house. So if you have screws, you may want to get one of those strong drywall magnets that they have so you can find the screws and remove those. That will minimize a lot of the dust. That way you're not prying and breaking a bunch of drywall everywhere. Now, before I install any of the trim, I just wanted to show you what I have going on here. So you can see the outside through my window. So while I have all the trim off and it's easy to access, I'm going to be spraying some spray foam. Just great stuff, window and door foam, to seal the gap all around the window. Now is the best time to seal it. If you find that your windows also have gaps like that, you definitely want to seal those. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure for the sill that's going to go right here. It's important to make sure that you measure far enough. So I'm going to be doing a Craftsman style trim. So there's going to be a 3x5 or a 3.5 inch board going up this way. And I want the sill to come out past that. So I'm going to be having the trim board here. This is going to be 3/4. There's going to be 3/16 inch reveal. And then I got to measure over to 3.5 from there. So that puts me right about there. So this mark here will be the end of my trim, and I want to go out probably about 1.5 inches outside of that, which is going to put me about there. And then this side over here is going to go all the way to the wall. So I'm going to be measuring from the wall over to my mark there, which gives me 45 1/4. I also measured for the notches right here. They ended up being 3 5/8 on the right side, and the left side was 40 1/2. I just use my miter saw to cut the notches out. And then for the end cut, I just use a scrap board so that I can push the material off of the surface of the fence a little bit. You could also just use a jigsaw for the whole thing. I did use a jigsaw to clean up the cuts at the end. Alright, so before I set the stool, since it's only 3/4 of an inch, I wanted to come up a little bit higher to cover some of the window frame. So I'm going to use this trick I learned from Spencer Lewis over at Insider Carpentry. I'm going to use these drywall screws as shims or spacers. Just going to screw them in a little bit, and then I will set and level the stool. So I'm not tight to the back. I have about 1/8 of an inch gap, about the thickness of this here. So I'm going to use this to scribe a line, and then I will trim this so it goes back better. I scribed off camera, but I just used a jigsaw to follow the line that I scribed. There's a lot of drywall buildup right here. That's why there's this little notch there. And it looks good. It's tight to the back, so that should be good. So the last step with the sill is to cut a return on this edge. This is the exposed end grain. So I'm going to cut this out of 45 and then flip it and glue it onto itself. Now I do this multiple times throughout the video to get rid of the end grain and turn it into edge grain. It makes it a whole lot easier to paint, and to attach it, I ended up just using 18 gauge brads. And so there's the finished product. So this is edge grain now and not end grain, so this will paint up a lot better once I prime it. Anytime I attach trim to trim, I'm just using 18 gauge brads, and if I'm attaching any sort of framing or baseboards or anything, I'll end up using 16 gauge brads. So the side jambs are going to be 61 inches, and the top is going to be the same width as this here, so that keeps everything square in line. It looks like that is 36 7/8. So to attach everything, I'm going to be using pocket holes. I'm just marking the sides that I want to be the back. I'm using glue. I know it's a primed surface, so it may not do anything, but better safe than sorry. It was at this point I realized I really screwed up. I used screws that were too long. I used 1.5 inches when I should have used 1.25 inches. Now on the back of their box, it says 1.5 inches should work, but clearly they didn't, and it got stuck to the surface of the table. It was easy to remove, and I ended up having 3 or 4 spare 1.25 inch screws, so I didn't end up having to go to the store for anything. For the top, I used the screws that were too long through the pocket holes, and then I came back and pre-drilled and screwed in through the top. Now, you might be wondering, why don't I just screw through the top and the bottom to begin with? And the reason is, the screws hold way better in the side of a board than they do in the top or bottom of a board. So it might seem easier to just go through the top and into the end grain, but it is a lot better to use pocket holes and screw through the side of a board. It holds a lot better long term. Alrighty. So the next step is to get my measurements for the trim. So my reveal will be 3/16 of an inch. I'm also going to be notching the sill right here, where this door is going to be going. That's looking at 61 1/4. Yep, 61 1/4. Or the overhang for the top piece is going to match the overhang for the bottom piece, which is 1.5 inches. So if I lay this here on my line, mark this side, 43 1/4. So 1.5 inches would be 44 3/4. So I'm going to be pocket holing the side pieces of trim. I'm also going to be cutting a return for the ends of the top piece because that's end grain there. So I'll cut a return and glue those on. That way it paints up a lot better. Now, to attach the trim, you just line it up with the reveal marks. Make sure that the pocket holes that you drilled are facing towards the top of the window, and then just nail it on with 18 gauge brads again. I think I ended up using 1.25 inch long brads for this part. Then you just want to make sure that the trim is square to the jamb, and then nail it in through the bottom as well. Now, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but the material that I'm using is all 1x4s, which is just 3/4 inches by 3.5 inches actually. And the top headers for everything I'm using is actually 5/4 material. And what that means is 1/4 equals literally 1/4 of an inch. So if you have 5/4, then it is 1.25 inches thick. I got this at Home Depot, so you should be able to pick this up locally. It's just a really thick header, and it looks really good with Craftsman style trim. Now, once everything was level, to attach this window unit to the framing, I just used 16 gauge brads. I think I bought 2-inch brads and just nailed them right into the studs that were there. So off camera, I ended up just attaching this board on the bottom to hide the gaps underneath and to match the style. So I went from the edge here all the way to the end here. I wanted them to line up there. So that's all that I do. Now I just need to caulk it, fill the nail holes, and paint. So here's the final product. This is after everything was caulked and the nail holes were filled. I used Alex Flex for the caulking, and I used Drydex to fill the nail holes. I did the door trim and the baseboards and everything off camera because those are relatively simple. The window trim is really something that I wanted to focus on more. As far as paint, I used Sherwin-Williams Emerald Urethane Trim Enamel in pure white and a satin sheen. This paint is really high quality, but it is really expensive. I think it was $90 for a gallon. This is a little sneak peek of a future video I have coming up, the feature wall for this room. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching.